Ladies and gentlemen, my name is TotalBiscuit. I'm here to ask and answer one simple question. WTF is Victor Vran. Looks a little bit like Van Helsing, doesn't it? Well, obviously inspired by the mythos and the story, but not necessarily by the trilogy of games. Victor Vran is by a company whose name I can never properly pronounce. I believe it's Haemimont, and they were responsible for Tropico 3, 4, and 5, as well as about 6,000 pieces of DLC for said games, and a couple of other things as well, like Imperium Romana. This is an action RPG. It's got a couple of little twists which make it a little bit different when comparing it to other games in the genre. Let's dive right in and demonstrate that for you, shall we? So you play the titular Victor Vran, who is a hunter, essentially, and he comes to a town in search of one of his friends, and as a direct result, he ends up dealing with a demonic infestation. Now, you might be wondering, did I just see a character jump in an action Diablo-style RPG? Well, yes, you did. It's actually one of the features of the game. You can jump, and indeed you can wall jump, as you can see right here, which is necessary for accessing many hidden areas. You can also dodge roll, which is interesting and frankly required if you wish to avoid taking huge damage. So this area right here, the palace, is your hub, and the hub contains a variety of vendors as well as a transmutation device that you get access to later on in the game, which allows you to transmute items that you happen to have, put them together, and you can make things with them. There are various ways to do so, and there is a selection of recipes to tell you what's going on there. I can transmute this right here, transmute 3 of the warrior to make a level 2 uncommon the warrior card, and so on and so forth. You can transmute weapons, you can gamble weapons into other weapons, you can change the color of your outfit. Got a stylish blue going on here with the Kung Lao style hat going on. It's a little bit odd. And all that kind of thing. And this is also the place where you will access the various instanced areas of the world. This is not an interconnected world. It consists of various areas that you can teleport directly to from the hub. Although, interestingly enough, you can't teleport back to the hub, at least not within the first 4 hours of the game. So let's jump right into this area, shall we? You'll see that there's a set of objectives here. You'll also see that for some reason the frame rate drops down to 30 during these scenes. It also does that in cutscenes as well. It's not really a huge deal, but I just want to make you aware that that happens. That is a little bit weird. The game does not run at that. It runs at an uncapped frame rate, I believe, or whatever the limit of your monitor is, which in my case is 144 hertz, so 144 frames per second. Ow, that's an exploding spider. Probably best to keep an eye on that in the future. So, it is an action RPG, as we mentioned. It looks like we're going to be fighting a lot of spiders in this area, which means click to murder, for the most part. Lots and lots of click to murder. But there are a couple of twists here and there that you might find a little bit interesting. As we mentioned earlier, you've got the dodge roll, which is extremely useful, and you can also jump, which means you can actually stomp down and knock enemies out of the way as well, which is quite neat. That's the sort of thing that you can do to break up large groups. I'm just gonna slaughter our way through here and try not to die, thank you very much. You'll also notice our character goes flying backwards after explosions and certain things like that, which I think is kind of neat. So that does change the dynamic just a little bit. What is perhaps more of a surprise is the way that the weapon system works. So this game does not have classes. You play Victor Vran regardless. You don't play Victor Vran the Magician, Victor Vran the Thief, Victor Vran the Warrior. He's just Victor Vran, which means he uses hunter-style weapons, and there are actually quite a few of those. If we go to the Codex, you'll see the number of weapons that I currently have found so far. Now, each of these weapons has a set of characteristics and a set of attacks, as well as, in some cases, its own unique resource system. So, let's say, for instance, the rapier. Now, the rapier is a very fast weapon with armor piercing, and every time you get a kill, it has an additional effect. Now, this means that this is absolutely fantastic for stabbing really powerful monsters repeatedly. You can cause bleeding effects, you get an enrage buff on if you kill with the final attack of the flurry, which means the next attack, regardless of what weapon you're using, is going to do 100% more damage. The lightning gun is a great example of something a little bit different. That is a multi-target ranged weapon. It zaps between targets. It applies an electrocution debuff, And once you have electrocuted targets, you can fire out the ball lightning, which will bounce between them, and also you can use a lightning trap. The scythe, which I'm using right here, is particularly interesting. It has a resource system called soul shards, which you can see down at the bottom there. The more soul shards you have, the more powerful your Q and E attacks are. It also has a timing system involved in it, which means that if you time your attacks correctly, if you get the right rhythm, it will actually slightly reduce the cooldown on your special abilities. So if we're talking about special abilities, we've got things like that. Very, very powerful attack, pretty long cooldown, but if I head over here, if you watch E for a second, you'll notice every time I click it, and do it right anyway, it's going to decrease that cooldown, so that's kind of neat. And I can also blind them. So every weapon has a primary attack as well as 2 cooldown-based special abilities. And you can switch between up to 2 weapons at any given time. And of course, you can equip whichever 2 weapons you so desire. In this case, I have a hand mortar, which does things like this, and also rather amusingly that, which is pretty cool. And I have the scythe, which is what I showed you earlier, which can do this, which is a dazing conal attack, as well as this spinning attack, which does area of effect damage. Now, in addition to that, you can have up to 2 demon powers. In this case, I have the Boomerang, and I also have Sanguine Aura, which is a healing and armor aura, which I can put on there. There we go. And this uses the overdrive meter, which is to the bottom. Now, how you generate overdrive is an interesting topic again, because it changes depending on what outfit you're wearing. Around the start of the game, you get a choice of 3 outfits. The outfit that I picked, which I believe is the Vigilante, is an outfit that allows me to generate overdrive through critical hits. So if you're looking for a crit-based build, you probably want an outfit that does that. I have another outfit, and it'll actually completely change the way that I look. If I click here, and I change it out for the Zealot's outfit, I then look like this. The Zealot's outfit does not generate any additional overdrive, but what it does do is it gives me a bunch of armor and health. I'm going to swap back to there. There we go. So it changes the look. So there isn't a traditional armor inventory kind of ragdoll system going on here. You pick an outfit and that is it. So you don't find armor pieces. What you find are weapons, what you find are demon powers, and what you also find are double consumables. And you can also equip up to 3 destiny cards. These destiny cards are a bunch of passives. For instance, I have the Bishop, gain 100 health on crit with a cooldown. The Moon, you probably saw that in combat. Every time I crit with a cooldown, it causes a frost aura. And the Divine Slayer right here, 100 health on kill, also has an extra passive called the Divine Ability, 18% chance to get an additional drop from chests. So there you go. Pretty neat. Now, a decent amount of customization, despite the fact that the game almost completely abandons all of the more traditional ways of doing equipment in action RPGs. And it also messes again with the combat just a little bit. Yes, you know, there's a bunch of slicing and dicing and hacking and slashing, but you can jump, which is great for getting out of large groups of enemies. And you can knock them back with this particular stomp right here. And of course, you can also dodge roll. So they've got elements of character action or spectacle fighter games involved in here. The wall jumping in particular is kind of neat. Although I have to say that the wall jumping, while reasonably well conceived, is a bit confusing from an isometric perspective. It doesn't necessarily work all that well because rather than, say, a third-person game, you can't really tell where you're going to land if you do a wall jump. This is, you know, for instance there, if I do that wall jump, this area was hidden. I mean, there's an archway right there that was hidden because I was right under it, so the game kicked in its transparency effect to make sure that I could actually see. So I jumped into an invisible barrier there. There are also other issues with it where it's difficult to really calculate your jumps. In fact, there's really not a great deal of that actually going on in the game for the most part. If you can wall jump into an area, just spam that jump button and it will get you up there eventually. That seems to be the way that it works for the most part. Now, what are you going to be doing in the game? Mostly killing monsters. I mean, if you're not into killing monsters, then this is probably not the genre for you, I would imagine. But that's really what the game involves, and also going into instanced areas and completing various little side objectives. Each area, I believe, has about 5 side objectives. So in this case, if I hit the M button, that'll take me to the map. This really should pop up on the UI without having to go to the map, but hey, there you go. Slay monsters with Lava Creeper's Death Blast, slay spider nests, and these are the rewards you get. Experience, and treasure chests. If I slay 500 spiders with melee attacks, which obviously is a bit of a pain in the arse, because I have to attack spiders that explode on death, which is something of a nightmare. I'm given a special chest, which is really quite awesome. So each area has 5 of these objectives, and some of them are pretty damn difficult because some of them require you to activate hexes. Now, hexes right here are things you can activate in order to make the game more difficult. So if I put on Hex of Tyranny, some monsters become champions, and they're not counted towards challenges, but I do gain increased item find and experience gain. And some of the challenges are linked to these hexes. Now, this is something of a dynamic difficulty setting. This is definitely not the first game that's done it. I certainly remember Bastion having that. Although, what I don't remember Bastion having was a reason to activate them other than just pure challenge for yourself. There are reasons to do it in this game. Absolutely. I'm going to get myself another chest. If I get a few of those, I can transmute them into a larger chest, which will hopefully give me a better reward there. So, some of the challenges require to use that, which is nice, because that lets you ramp up the difficulty. Now, I'm dealing with a bunch of champion monsters, and you'll suddenly see a bunch of special effects kicking off and all sorts of things like that, which is kind of neat, is it not? I would certainly say so. Here you go, have some of that, and have some of that. Thank you very much. So that's kind of interesting. The weapon system in particular I find to be intriguing. It's an interesting replacement to a traditional action RPG class system. Now, that's not to say that I think it's necessarily better. You know, having a couple of different weapons doesn't make you an entirely different class. Ultimately, your class is Demon Hunter, one way or the other. You're just going to hunt demons in slightly different ways. You're not going to become a magician. You can only ever have 2 demon powers, and they're all activated via the overdrive system. So yes, you can have a character that's more focused on demon powers, but you can never be someone that does nothing but magic. You're gonna have to fight with weapons, whether they be ranged or melee. That's just the reality of the way that the game works. But the fact that you change to a different weapon and it gives you a completely different set of attacks, resources, and strategies is really quite nice. There is a huge difference between the weapons in this game. If I switch out to the hammer, for instance, rather than the scythe, this is a big, slow AoE weapon with charge up effects, but it does massive area of effect damage. It's actually really satisfying to use. I really love the hammers. They're actually kind of great. But, you know, maybe I could choose the rapier, or I could choose the sword. If I'm kind of a crit-based guy, maybe I want the sword, because the sword has abilities that trigger on crit and all sorts of things like that. And there are still weapons that I haven't actually discovered in the game yet. I've shown you some types right here. That's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I don't know how many weapons there are total. I mean, maybe it's 8. I know they're going to be adding new ones. They did announce that they're going to be adding free DLC post-launch. But I do like that system. Again, it reminds me more of an action RPG. It's like switching weapons in God of War, for instance. You know, it changes your combat style. Although, unfortunately, the game doesn't have a bunch of really crazy, awesome combos. It's not a character action game. It is just influenced in some way by that. But I do think that's a nice departure from the way that most action RPGs do their weapons, which in many cases is nothing really more than a stat stick. Oh my.
How many there are.
Here you go. Have some grenades. That will probably do the job, won't it? There we go. Let's fire a few over there. Nice, nice, nice. I'll jump off here. There we go. Oh, okay. We have ourselves a boss fight. Fair enough. I think I can blow up a good number of these, I hope. Yeah, it's a neat system. I like it quite a lot. But some people are definitely not going to be so happy with it, because in an action RPG they expect to be able to pick different classes, and the vast majority of those action RPGs allow you to do that. This just happens to not be one of them. So maybe for some people that's not going to really work for them. And actually I think that's a nice little theme for this particular video. I'm going to call this game an action RPG for people who don't necessarily enjoy action RPGs. Maybe you like the principle, the idea of action RPGs, but maybe you've just not found them all that engaging. That describes me in a nutshell. There are some action RPGs that I've been engaged by for a good amount of time. Path of Exile is a great example of that. And, of course, you've also got games like, say, Diablo 3 Reaper of Souls. I was into that for quite some time. I definitely enjoy that. This is getting a little bit wild. Okay. All right. Stomp them. There we go. Oh, wow. So much damage. Okay. Let's get back to the mortar. I think that should work pretty well here. But for the most part, I have this one particular problem with action RPGs in that I find they get a little bit too repetitive. And a lot of action RPGs are based obviously on clicking and activating abilities. And as a result, they don't generally keep me engaged for all that long. Definitely, Reaper of Souls probably has the most luck there, and Path of Exile. But for the most part, I like the idea of action RPGs and getting loot and things like that, but I don't like the process of acquiring it. Now, this game goes some way to fixing that problem for me, because it does make the combat system a little bit more interesting with dodge rolls and things like that. Oh, God. Ouch. That was unpleasant. You know, let's turn the Hex of Tyranny off, shall we? Thank you very much. We don't need that. Alright, we're going to go do this boss fight once again.
57, 58.
Anyway, as I was saying, that's the sort of thing that I find to be a little bit more enjoyable because I'm the kind of person that likes character action games. So I like things like dodge rolls, and I like things like wall jumping and all sorts of things like that. It's a nice little addition, I think, to the genre. And I like the idea of getting loot, but the process of getting it was kind of dull. Now, this is where you're obviously going to find quite a few differences between me and someone that really likes action RPG. I think someone that really likes action RPGs is going to want to get loot on a fairly consistent basis. Now, this game doesn't give you as much loot because obviously you don't have armor pieces. So, yeah, that's a fairly major component of most action RPGs. But what you do have are weapons, and the fact that weapons sort of completely change your combat style, for me, has kept the game a little bit interesting. Because every now and again I'll find something really good, and maybe I've been using a scythe for a while, and suddenly maybe I want to use a rapier again, or I want to use a sword again. That keeps things kind of interesting. I think that's a pretty good idea. But those who are looking for things like in-depth character building, that isn't here. You know, you're not going to be looking through talent trees. You're not going to be spending a great deal of time min-maxing your character. I know for a lot of people that is a big attraction of those sort of games. So maybe you won't necessarily find this as enjoyable as a result of it not having it. It is a very subjective thing. Sometimes less is more. Sometimes the things that you take away are just as valuable as the things that you add when it comes to video games. And to some degree, you've got that here. Because what you've taken out is valuable to some people that didn't enjoy that particular element in the action RPG genre. And I do appreciate it when games do try to innovate in some way, because there have been quite a few action RPGs come out over the last few years, and they're pretty good. You know, the Van Helsing series is a great example of a good action RPG, but simultaneously, it doesn't do a huge amount different to traditional action RPGs. And I think there's definitely this reliance on people that are huge fans of the genre, so you want to make a game that is familiar to them. But simultaneously, maybe there is room for innovation in the genre. I certainly think that there is. Victor Vran does provide a decent amount of that, and for the most part, that innovation does actually end up working out, which is good. So that comes down to a personal choice for you. Does the idea of having a game where you don't get a massive amount of loot sound appealing to you, or is that a downside? That's going to be subjective, because what I can tell you is that you don't get that much loot. You do get a lot of weapons, which you're probably going to end up selling. You know, they're still dropping greys and things, even at this stage of the game. So I'm, for the most part, either looking for a really good green or these gold-colored things here. And I believe there's purple as well, but I've never actually acquired one of those drops at any point. And we could just teleport right out of here. And in fact, that's exactly what I'm going to do. Now, storyline aspects. Let's talk a little bit about that. Well, the story is relatively threadbare, but there is one thing that I think really adds to it, and that's the fact that they have a rather amusing narrator, sort of ghost spirit, that is consistently being sarcastic and evil to you. And there was a particular sequence that I enjoyed when I was in a mine, and it just seemed like any old regular dungeon. And in this mine, the level was designed in a loop. And he made this comment, he made this remark, it's like, oh, you know, we're back where we started. That can't be right. You should probably go for another lap. If you actually do go for another lap, he laughs at you and says, I can't believe that you just did that. There's another sequence where he's consistently telling you to go in the wrong direction, and he keeps narrating it as if this was actually a story that he was telling. So it's like, Victor Vran went down this corridor, obviously in the wrong direction, blah, blah, blah. So he tells it as if it were a novel, which I think is really interesting, and it's an absolutely fantastic way of adding a little bit of humor to the game. So there's a nice interaction between this character, obviously you do have no idea who this guy is, and the main character. I think it works really, really well. I personally find it hilarious. I know some people complained that it sort of took away from my immersion or whatever, but frankly, it's a game about slashing up thousands of monsters in a completely unrealistic fashion. I could take a little bit of humor to break up the monotony every once in a while. Seems to work fairly well. I mean, even a dark world like Diablo still had some humor in it. So for me, that works absolutely fine. So far, I'm giving this a relatively good impression. Yeah, I actually have enjoyed my time so far with Victor Vran. There are definitely some concerns. I mean, a lack of depth is certainly one of them. Yes, while it's nice that weapons have individual attacks and resource systems, how complex can they get in the late game? How many suffixes, how many prefixes? What can really happen there? How well does the game scale? How good is the game after you've played it multiple times? I know a lot of people that play action RPGs are very concerned about the longevity of the title because they want to be able to play it for hundreds and hundreds of hours and continue to feel progress. Now, I don't know if you will get that here. I do know the game is fairly short. There are people claiming they've actually beaten it in like 6 or 7 hours. Now, obviously, some action RPGs you can blitz through, no doubt about that, but I do have to wonder about its replayability. Yes, it has a hard mode, and yes, it also has a hardcore mode and full online cooperative multiplayer. Indeed, it also has PvP if you're looking for something like that as well. We'll get ourselves another gift box there. I'd like to transmute those a little bit later. But if you're looking for something that you can play for hundreds and hundreds of hours, I don't necessarily know if you're going to be able to get something like that. I have absolutely no idea if it's going to last you that long. What I do know is that 4 hours in, or like 4.5, 5 hours in at this point, I am still having a great deal of fun with it. It also performs pretty well, which is nice. If we have a look at the options menu, you will notice that it is fairly comprehensive. Go to video first. You've got windowed mode, full screen, and borderless. One complaint I do have is that windowed mode doesn't let you set the size of it in the menu itself. You have to sort of drag the window out, which can always be pretty awkward. Please do that. If you have a windowed mode, let us also select the resolution. I was playing a 2560 by 1440. With AA off, performance is really, really good, about 120 frames per second. With AA on, and I'm not talking FXAA here, I believe it's MSAA. Yes, MSAA up to 8 times. It dropped for me down to about 60 in many areas. AA is definitely a pretty big hog in this title, so I mean, you're fairly well zoomed out, so I don't really notice the difference. You've got anisotropic filtering here. Admittedly, it would be nice to know exactly how much rather than having these low and high descriptions. That doesn't really tell me much. Shadows, go up to ultra. Grass and textures next. You've got some post-processing. You can turn your vignette on and off. You can turn bloom on and off if that's not your thing. And you can change the resolution, I believe, of the cutscenes. And it's even got a frame rate counter, which is kind of neat. And I believe it can also do frame timing as well, which is not the sort of thing you generally expect from a lot of modern games, and it's quite nice to have it there, so I appreciate that. If we go to controls, you can rebind all of the keys, and you can also add a secondary key press to each key binding, which is always lovely to see, and it does support the mouse as well. So I actually bound my weapon switch to scroll up. That made a lot more sense than pressing the middle button to me. So that's good. And you can also enable or disable double tap to dodge, which is nice. And you've got a set of control sets. So if you want to play it like a more traditional action RPG, you can select mouse move. It also has full controller support. And this game actually works really well with a controller. I mean, generally, I wouldn't recommend a controller for action RPGs, but this one in particular, because of it's more weirdly to say, I suppose, an action-oriented action RPG, then you do actually benefit quite a lot from using the controller. And you've got quite a lot of UI customization here as well. You can turn the rotating the minimap on and off, which is useful because you've got full camera rotation control. It does have a colorblind mode, which is great. Always nice to see that. And you can turn things like your damage numbers, critical text, and all that sort of thing on and off. I've actually got to put the health bar on our hero. That might be nice. So, actually, it's got pretty much everything I could desire from an options menu. It's good. I'm not really noticing anything glaring that's missing there. And we'll just have a quick look at sound options as well. Separate sliders for everything, reverb on and off, and subtitles on and off. Perfect. I mean, yeah, it's good. That's a really nice set of options. It's to be expected. You know, they are a PC-specific developer. They've worked on PC for a long time. So it is not surprising to see that, but it is welcome nonetheless. So far, so good, right? Yeah. for the most part. I mean, it's not the world's greatest looking game, no doubt about that, but it's got some pretty satisfying particle effects. If you murder skeletons, they tend to explode in satisfying ways. Good auras and big over-the-top kills, and a rather amusing physics system where you knock bodies absolutely everywhere. Definitely the kind of thing that you would want from an action RPG. But certainly looks a little bit dated. Doesn't look like it is a modern 2015 game in terms of things like its texture resolution and everything like that, although it does have pretty good quality animations as far as I'm concerned. But what about the disadvantages of it? Well, a lot of that stuff is very subjective, although I do have some complaints about things that I don't particularly like. I mean, for one thing, why is it that I have to run back to the castle in many ways? There's no sort of town portal in any way that allows me to teleport back to the castle. Not really sure what their motivation was there. I'm trying to think, is there a good reason not to have sort of town portal functionality there to allow you to go back to town whenever you like? I don't know, but it also means that the game has quite a lot of backtracking, because you've got your main hub, and then you have these hub-like areas which have various sub-dungeon entrances within them. And they also have their own separate objectives as well. This is a prime example of that. There are a number of different entrances over here. You can see, like, I've 4-starred the Sepulchre of the Damned. There's a befouled tomb up there. That's kind of the sort of thing I'm looking for. And you will end up going back to these areas. This is like the 3rd time that I've been here. So yeah, a little bit of backtracking and definitely a little bit of reuse of the same areas, and that is perhaps worthy of mentioning as a potential negative. A lot of the rest of it is really down to what you personally want from an action RPG. Are you the kind of person that really enjoyed a lot of Diablo, really enjoyed a lot of Path of Exile, Titan Quest, and so on and so forth? You're looking for something similar? Well, this game is kind of not that. As I said, it is more action-orientated. It is mostly killing things. Yes, you can make class builds, absolutely, but the difference between the so-called classes are fairly minimal. It's about weapon choice, it's about which outfit and demon powers you use, and which suffixes and prefixes you end up looking for. You don't have completely different classes like Monk and Mage and Necromancer and so on and so forth. Those are not things that exist. If you're looking for a game with this sort of theme that has those, then frankly I would recommend that you go and have a look at the Incredible Adventures of Van Helsing. 2 and 3 in particular have different class choices. So there's a lack of depth there, and I think some people are definitely going to find that obnoxious, although a lot of other people might actually be okay with that. They don't necessarily want to spend hundreds of hours at the late game tweaking stats and so on and so forth. Not that you ever really had to do that, but if you wanted to play at the super high difficulty levels, you absolutely did. This seems like more of a kind of introduction to action RPGs in the way that it's designed. And for me, that's not bad, because as I said, I do like the fact that it has a little bit more action involved in it. It's got a little bit of character action, a little bit of spectacle fighter in there. That's good. I think that's a nice piece of innovation, considering. Although for some people, that's not going to be what they are looking for. They're going to be looking for a game that has a lot of skills. Well, you know, I've got a left click and then 2 cooldown-based skills per weapon, and I can carry 2 weapons. And I can have 2 demon powers. So yeah, maybe that adds up to the number of skills that you can have active in something like Diablo 3, and it does, but simultaneously, a lot of those skills are quite similar. So there are worthy criticisms, I think, to be found there. Although I do think that they've done a pretty damn good job in distinguishing the different weapons, and I think it helps that they use those custom resource systems, things like soul shards, and they also theme different weapons around different playstyles and ideas. So you're probably going to end up hunting weapons that really suit your playstyle. Now, I'm a little concerned about a lack of enemy variety. I mean, I've been playing for a while, and this game's got a hell of a lot of undead in it. And also, undead keep getting up again. Yes, I know that's thematic, but god, that can get annoying. Particularly when you have some of the harder modifiers on, when you're dealing with things like champion gravediggers. When you're dealing with people like that and then they just stand right the hell back up again, it really does get very, very annoying. I get it as a gimmick on some monsters, but there are some levels which are pretty much nothing but undead, so you're going to be killing the same dudes over and over and over again. I believe that if you overkill the enemy, they don't come back, so you can build around that, and there are certain ways to improve your ability to overkill. But outside of that, these guys coming back over and over again is probably going to get pretty annoying. So I'd kind of criticize that as well, to a lesser extent. And also, I suppose, an inherent problem of the genre, it's a game about hacking and slashing your way through groups of monsters, and that really isn't going to change. And if you don't like that, then you probably shouldn't be looking at action RPGs in the first place, because this is what most of them do. How much role-playing is there? Well, nothing. Is the story there? Yes, but it's kind of threadbare for the most part. And I think the story is saved solely, perhaps, by the narrator and his interactions with Victor Vran, who is incidentally voiced by the same guy that voiced Geralt in the Witcher series. So you might notice that is extremely familiar. He does literally sound like Geralt. But outside of that, though, I think it's got some really nice ideas. I mean, I love the fact that the dungeons have different challenges. That tends to vary things up just a little bit. It forces you to play in different ways, which I think keeps the combat a little bit more interesting. And it's also got a number of challenges which are quite hard to accomplish. They require speed, and as a result, you may wish to replay dungeons to get 5 stars and to get the really, really good treasure that way. So that does give the game somewhat of a decent amount of longevity, although I do think if you're not pursuing that, you might end up running into situations where the game is perhaps a little bit repetitive. I'm going to equip a couple of different weapons here just to show you what they do. I'll do that, and this lightning gun sucks, but I'll equip it anyway. I'm going to show you the shotgun, the lightning gun and the shotgun right here. Oh, and we're fighting a boss with it. Okay, that's probably a bad idea. This is the lightning gun, and you'll see everything kind of bouncing between them. And we set up a lightning trap there. And this is the shotgun. Now, with the shotgun, if I use that spread ability, I gain speed. I also gain a rechargeable sort of critical attack here as well. So, all of the ranged weapons and all of the melee weapons do play a little bit differently. It's absolutely nice to have that. But I don't know how long the game is. A lot of people are reporting it's fairly short, and I imagine it does have some replay value, but it's not like you're going to be rolling up an entirely different class and playing the game again, which is often the kind of thing which keeps you playing things like Diablo 3. Oh, I'm just going to roll up a completely new class because it's going to be a completely new experience. Well, no, it's not a completely new experience playing with different weapons. Admittedly, it's... Ooh, Power Stone's nice. Okay, I'm going to get... Yeah, let's get one of those, absolutely. That's what we like to see. But it's not like you don't get a different experience from the different weapons. You do. It's just you're going to sort of be stuck with this idea that you are playing a vampire hunter, a demon hunter, or whatever, and there's no escaping that. Might limit people's replayability and tolerance for the game. But honestly, I think Victor Vran is a pretty good effort. I've enjoyed my time with it a great deal. I think it's definitely helped by the sarcastic narrator and the fact that I love characters like that. I have an unreasonable attraction to characters like that, probably because I'm British. So I appreciate that sort of thing. I think the dungeon design is pretty reasonable. I like the fact that dungeons often have secrets which you need to find. They often involve like jumping up using the wall jump ability. And they also often involve finding hidden areas. Things that you wouldn't necessarily expect. So that does give you encouragement to explore the whole dungeon, whereas otherwise you could very easily blitz through it. You can completely ignore those objectives if you like, but I think that it's a lot more fun to simply try and pursue them. And it's a lot easier to do as well, because you probably notice on the minimap they have a little breadcrumb system to show you where you've been. It's definitely not the first game to do that, but that's a nice little quality of life improvement. That shows the developers have absolutely learned from previous games in the genre. And for their first action RPG effort, this is absolutely not a bad start at all. I'm enjoying Victor Vran quite a lot. I expect that I will try and finish the game. And then eventually I will see what's after that. And that very well might be its weakness. So don't go in expecting hundreds of hours of gameplay. There are other games in the genre that do that. Things like Diablo 3 and of course things like Path of Exile. That's not what this game is. But if you're like me and you maybe enjoy the idea of action RPGs, but you find them a little bit samey, a little bit too repetitive, and you just wish that there were things like dodge rolls and jumping and different weapons that all do different things as opposed to simply being stat sticks, then Victor Vran, actually, might be worth your time, you know? Might be worth a look. So hopefully this game does relatively well and they get to add a bunch more content to it to improve the longevity. But outside of that, you can pick this one up for $20 or your regional equivalent on Steam, and I really quite like it, actually. Not too bad at all. Ladies and gentlemen, my name has been TotalBiscuit. How damn convenient is it to be able to jump down to an area? Ah, That first stupid dungeon in Diablo 3, don't get me started. Anyway. Victor Vran, ladies and gentlemen, available for $20 from Axiom Esports sponsor GOG.com and also, of course, on Steam. Sit down! Jeez!